This might be a blasphemous sentiment to many McCarthy diehards, but I think Hello, welcome to Books and Booze. This is a series where I talk about books and I have some booze. I'm Alex. This time I will be talking about Cormac McCarthy's Outer Dark, which is no stranger to this channel. This time too, I'll also be sipping on some scotch as we've done previously with McCarthy's novels on the channel. And as the temperature dropped, I just really want some, so I picked up this Glenmorangie single malt Speyside. It's their classic, which I think is an 8-year single malt if I recall correctly. But it's a great buy for $30, so I'll be sipping on that throughout the course of this video. This video is also kind of in part of a collaboration with another YouTuber, my friend Britton over on Some OK Dudes channel. We will be having a more in-depth discussion, just a chat between me and him. We read it over the course of October together, and so if you want to get more in-depth discussion around it, or you want to get a new perspective from him on it as we talk through that, I'm going to link that video in the description below, and hopefully we'll time it just right where when this video comes out, his will also be out as well. I also think viewers of my channel will just like what he has going on over there. He's very thoughtful and conscious about the media he's consuming and different cultural artifacts. I think he goes into really good discussion again and again over various different types of media and various different topics and themes. So I think you would also like just his channel overall. So please go see what he's doing over there. Let's go ahead and have a little sip, and I'll tell you all about this before we get into it. Yeah, for me, that's exactly what I wanted as the temperature dropped, and wanted some scotch. It's very scotchy scotch. If that's not your thing, I would steer clear of this, especially I think Speysides in general kind of have that, not as heavy on the peat as something like a Lagavulin, but it's definitely more tangy than like nutty, like you could get from like a Highland scotch, for example. More tangy, more citrusy, has like almost a lemongrass feel to it. I really like it. And for $30, I think it's a great bottle to buy, so seek it out if so. But let's get into it with Outer Dark. Outer Dark is a 1968 novel by Cormac McCarthy. This is actually his second novel, though he wrote it in tandem with his first novel, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But it follows this rather bleak tale of two different siblings, Rinthi and Kula Holm, though we don't actually get their names till quite a while in the story. And they lived in this kind of unnamed, ambiguous, rural Appalachia setting. And after the girl, Rinthi, gives birth to her brother's child, yes, you heard that correctly, he attempts to abandon it in the woods to kind of rid himself of this shame that he clearly is feeling over it. And he lies to her, says that the child died instantly and so forth, but she discovers this lie pretty quick, and then she sets out to go find the child, and he sets out on kind of another journey to sort of just run away from the guilt of it all. She searches more with this combination of innocence and persistence, while he has more like guilt and self-loathing just driving him through this wandering, trying to escape the consequences of his actions. And along their journeys, they kind of run parallel at times, similar places, similar people end up encountering both of them. There's also this kind of experimental interludes throughout in italics about this unnamed group that are very violent and are also encountering the same people that they too have encountered. And as the novel continues to unfold with McCarthy's very strange, dreamlike prose, exploring themes of moral decay, fate, and kind of the brutal indifference that a natural world can evoke on someone, this tension slowly builds up, and there's kind of an inevitable tragedy that you feel hanging over the story that's going to be made manifest by the end of it as McCarthy continues to meditate over human suffering in this novel. The rural setting of Outer Dark echoes a lot of the landscapes McCarthy knew pretty well during this time, particularly the very kind of isolated, rugged regions of Tennessee and Appalachia. He has this early exposure in his first few novels about the South's history of poverty, religious fundamentalism, and general kind of like social isolation. And these influenced his work greatly here and onward, that I think we've seen on the channel as he even gets more into like the Western genre and Western landscapes. And this, I think, to some degree, kind of has a lot of those same hallmarks. It's almost like a prototypical Western in a way. I think you could classify it in that way. But it's also echoes a lot of McCarthy's own personal isolation that he was experiencing at the time. He had a lot of financial struggles trying to kick off a writing career, and he was going through a divorce, his first divorce, right at the same time of writing this. A lot of his writing in general, he apparently did in this abandoned barn in Tennessee somewhere. But he actually finished it abroad, and then really, after some editing notes, finished it returning alone to his family in Knoxville, Tennessee. And all throughout the 1960s, McCarthy kind of lived in relative poverty and just kind of traveled through the South, and you see that kind of appearing in this novel from that experience. So I think it's very interesting in a way that we can see McCarthy himself going through this transitional period in a novel that's very obsessed with transitions, perhaps wanting to heal from past regrets and sins of his own that he evokes into these characters. This is usually the time where I talk about things that I didn't like or maybe some caveats. If there's anything, I think this was actually probably the most visceral I felt McCarthy's style being, even more so than Blood Meridian, definitely more so than any of the Border trilogy. Some of that is also through him trying to capture this highly specific dialect. Had to reread a few areas here and there of just like, what is this character attempting to say? Or they are saying, and I just can't understand it. Other part of it is just because of some choices with the prose throughout. I think another thing to keep in mind is something I didn't really pick up on till a little later on in the book, is that this is highly more metaphorical than it is kind of naturalistic and trying to tell a grounded story. I think if I knew that from the get-go, I would have been into it much more like I am now. But it was a little bit of a barrier as I was trying to figure out, like, how does this work and that work? Should I be taking this literally? Should I be taking it symbolically? It's more of the latter. And in a way, I think I had to linger with this book for a bit because I don't like the ending. I mean, I like it. It's just very brutal, as you might come to expect from a lot of his writing, and it just shook me. So that's also a caveat, I think, going into this. But overall, I really, really love this book. And so, as with many other of McCarthy's books I've read so far, it's mainly things I like here, and I really like this one. First of all, it's his prose again and again. Outer Dark is saturated with shadows. You have just this sensation of like the sunless sky falls on the black bile of a creek, and as shadows journey across it and shapeless bodies. It's just like prose like that again and again and again, and always refreshing in some kind of way. It never really tires itself. I think in part the book's length helps with that. That's what's captured in this numinous, strange, and shapeless landscape of Appalachia. You can't really pinpoint it. I think that's intentional. The shapelessness of everything, as it's often described in the novel, is just a really fascinating prose choice here, because it's not necessarily imagery that's evoked, but it's more like sensation and feeling. The setting is shapeless in its own way. It's not set anywhere we can really know. It's like surprising even when the characters encounter towns, because of the almost like apocalyptic setting that is woven through that sense of shadow and darkness. And the characters themselves are often marked by features or titles or qualities rather than like an actual name. We know Kula's name for the most part throughout it, but it's like quite a substantial amount of time in the novel before we even get to know Renthy's name. It's like not until like halfway through. It's just boy and girl for the most part. You have other characters just called Squire, Tinker, woman, clerk, minister. There's not a lot of names in Outer Dark. And the shapelessness adds to that numinous atmosphere. There's this afterlife landscape that is being evoked. And that ultimately is how I came to read the novel and really find it fulfilling with that lens. And there's an overall unease of it. You can't pin anything down. Whatever can happen. I'll give you just an example here real fast. This is just describing Kula walking around the landscape like I've told you already. Quote, "He kept walking after the sun was down. There were no more houses. Later a moon came up and the road before him went winding, chalky, and vaporous through the black woods. Swamp peepers hushed constantly before him and commenced behind him as if he moved in a void claustral to sound. He carried a stick with him and prodded each small prone shadow through which he passed, but this road held only shapes of things." If I could ever craft something like that, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself. And I think overall, this afterlife reading that I ended up taking on with the book is really supported by the various biblical allusions in the title itself. The title is an allusion to the words of Jesus in the book of Matthew. In the ESV translation, it states, quote, "The sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So in this moment, Jesus emphasizes how faith in him truly saves someone rather than being born in the right place in the right time, like the kingdom of Israel. And the outer darkness, the weeping and gnashing of teeth, is typically how Jesus and other portions of the Bible describe hell. It becomes this sort of contortion of the typical hero's journey throughout. A journey may not be right. It's more like a wandering, a stumbling, and a fleeing in Kula's case. The structure is very compelling. There's two separate journeys, each with particular motivation, that gets at the novel's exploration of sin and innocence, which I think is the main dynamic being explored here, with which I can find logical and natural manifestations of threats and triumphs, though they're all symbolic in the end. And that's what I think. At its core, Outer Dark is a deep meditation on the nature of sin, the true essence of it in a way. Kind of like how I see Blood Meridian as a meditation on evil. Outer Dark is more hyper-focused on sin and innocence. Something I found fascinating is that McCarthy was apparently pretty influenced by particular Calvinist doctrines on sin, which I don't really know a whole lot about, but based on light research that comes down to concepts of original sin and total depravity. It's the title of them. In this and a lot of other things you read, original sin takes on like this truly genetic and heretical symbol with the child, especially towards the end of the book, which I'll get to later on. But the sin itself extends to all parts of the soul and in almost a natural way, unless Jesus intervenes. It has a progress. I think that's the whole point here through this wandering, is that the sin continuously progresses in a way that we're kind of met in the midst of it, and we get to see how it festers. I think we can witness Outer Dark as wanting to give the consequence of that progress a tale, a narrative framework, a journey with Kula takes on what sin looks like progressing, original sin progressing. What I find very crucial to it is that no matter what, he simply cannot rest. He cannot stop. It's not so much that he receives a particular punishment, something like a sort of one-for-one deal in Dante's Vision of Hell and Inferno. He just keeps going, and he's like hopelessly staggering into a strange, dark land that is hostile and confusing to him. From what I understand, total depravity is a theological concept that argues that we are sort of instantly polluted with sin because of original sin, and you're just without that intervention, it just festers in the same thing. Original sin's a starting point, but total depravity is that progress that I've been talking about, which I can see in the novel because of how isolated Kula and Rinthi are. There's arguably no external influence, especially for her, for the most part. She seems to have no idea what they did was something awful. Kula certainly does, but Rinthi is just sort of a tragedy all around. And as simple as it is, I think McCarthy crafts an excellent dynamic and juxtaposition between the two characters. Um, Ghoul is mainly the exploration of sin, while Renthi is more the exploration of innocence in the midst of that sin. She is also just kind of tossed into this land of confusion, which is a great song by Genesis, by the way. But she's ignorant to everything around it. She's totally oblivious to the multitude of advances from various men throughout the novel as she journeys. She's overall pretty trusting to everyone she encounters. She believes in the simple goodness of her quest. And to that degree, I think there's sort of a connection to the crossing here. I feel her idealism seems to be the only thing that keeps her more alive than others around her, in the same way that Billy has that in The Crossing. And the other thing I really adore about this book is sort of the intermingling of the supernatural and the natural, at least the way I read it. It takes a bit to figure out things as they are in Outer Dark. It all sort of has this indifference to it, though at least the landscape does. It just lets what's in each character's heart dictate the world they wander in. I think one of the best examples of this is actually toward the beginning, as Kula encounters this river that seems to be running backwards in a way, or at least purposely trying to confuse him. I'll also give another example of prose for that moment, as it's very early on, and I'm going to kind of jump around between a few pages here just to, as you can see, that sensation of the confusion, the disorientation happening. When he reached the bridge, he turned off the road and took a path along the river, the swollen waters coming in and blood-colored spume from about the wooden stanchions and fanning in the pool below with a constant and vicious hissing. He followed it down, carrying the child before him delicately, hurrying at a half-jog and keeping one eye skyward as if to measure against his progress the deepening shade. Before dark he came upon the creek again, smaller and clear, choked with duckwort and watercress, the fat verdant ground stretching away, everywhere beneath the sparse cover of trees and coppery haze quivering like some rare dust in this twilight. Moving forward, he did not return along the creek, but took his bearings by what faint light still lay in the west, as if something were about that crickets and night birds held in dread. He went on faster. He did not come upon the river again, but the creek again, or another creek. He followed it down, and in full flight now the trees began to close him in, malign and baleful shapes that reared like enormous androids, provoked at the alien insustainability of this flesh colliding among them. Long and long after he should have reached the river, he was careening through the woods with his hands outstretched before him against whatever dark might hold, until he began to stumble and a cold claw was raking upward through his chest. When he came upon the creek again, he splashed into it thigh and crotch before he knew it was there. There's this idea that the rivers themselves, the creeks, the water doesn't move right, so he's completely disoriented. And what I found very poignant about it is that rivers going backward in ancient mythology were often associated with the afterlife, the river Styx probably being the most popular example that you might know of. Dante also has many, many rivers throughout his afterlife, using similar structure to the Greek Hades, and Purgatorio using the same structure of the four rivers around Eden. And hey, at one point, Kula hires a ferryman to carry him over a raging river. You probably get where that illusion comes from. If you do, I think it's pretty clear what McCarthy is trying to do here. We're given a heads up that things aren't as they seem. Later on, an entire town's population vanishes and turns into a ghost town instantly. I think that's a play on words we're supposed to kind of pick up on. And then there's what I perceive as this sort of unholy trio, this unholy trinity. The novel has a great structure for tension using this violent trio as we get fragmented, more experimental excerpts from their journeys with context clues to show that they are near where our protagonists are. I see them as supernatural because of their ability to sort of just appear and reappear here and there. There's this sudden sense of fear they evoke in everyone they meet. I think it's also, there's a play on how demons are sometimes described in the Bible as deaf and dumb spirits. Some translations have it also as mute and deaf. One member is mute, and one of the other members is sort of an idiot, it seems. And then they have their leader. I don't know what it is, but McCarthy just makes the most evil entities in each of his novels kind of the most fascinating to read about, which I think speaks to how he wants to point out how evil itself can kind of captivate us and in order to manipulate and control. The leader has sort of a similar Judge Holden vibe here, though I think it's way more toned down than compared to that character. And I think overall, with the supernatural and kind of biblical reading, there's certainly probably some kind of play on Eden in this novel too, but I haven't really thought that through or figured that out. If you have something like that, let me know in the comments down below. And something that really pulled the novel together for me was, of course, the ending altogether. I'll do my best to put a spoiler, jump forward, note here. I know I'm bad about forgetting those, but I will remind Alex right now, editing, to add that here. Renthy's ending is sort of somber and yet not dire and terrible like the other one. She's certainly scarred, but she can kind of keep living in a way. Kula's ending, which I see as like the main storyline ending of the story, is just gut-wrenchingly fitting in a way. I think McCarthy leans into that expertly crafted sense of ambiguity at this point full force. Is Kula upset by what's happening? It's difficult. We just get his spoken responses. There's little to suggest what his heart is feeling or doing in this moment. To me, it's a full acceptance of the covenant that he's made with his sin. This is also symbolized through sort of like a forced unholy communion with the strange meat, and he's forced to kind of drink something with this trio at one point earlier on in the novel. So now Kula is perhaps as depraved as these demons around him in some way, at least in his heart. And then there's the further ending where Kula, further on, some indeterminate amount of time, watches this blind man who's about to go stumble into this dangerous bog. He claims that someone should let a blind man know about something like that before they set him out that way. And McCarthy crafts this kind of, I think, almost humorous ending, but more like it fits so well and speaks to something so deep in the human condition that it makes you chuckle. Kind of like, haha, like the ending of Nightmare Alley, haha, not like an actual haha moment. Kula himself was that man. He can step into this progress, that progressive nature of sin that he's seen, and stop it, but he ultimately doesn't because no one helped him. He simply thinks about how someone else should help the blind man, but not him. There's just so much I could say about this book. Too much. It lingers with you. It cycles through your mind like a lot of McCarthy's other works. I find it very deep and profound with its symbolism and narrative that are at play here. You already know, absolutely, toast of excellence for Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy. Big time. This might be a blasphemous sentiment to many McCarthy diehards, but I think, from my experience, the 5 books I've read so far, Outer Dark is like right below Blood Meridian for me. It's right there. It's just so good. So yeah, if you are a fan of McCarthy, if you're a fan of any of those themes that I talked about, a more dark exploration of biblical allusions and ideas, Southern Gothic literature in general, pick this one up. It's well worth your time. It's also pretty easy to get through. Just a bombastic novel all around. So yeah, cheers to Cormac McCarthy and Outer Dark. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you got something totally different from Outer Dark, because I bet many of you have, and I know I've barely touched on so many of the other things I wanted to talk about in it, start a discussion below in the comments. I'd love to just talk more about this novel and see what others have to say about it and what they gleaned from it. If you like long-form book reviews with some analysis like this one, please consider looking at what else I have on the channel. If you also like video essays around cultural analysis, mainly movies, I'm putting those out through on the channel periodically here and there too. I'm very into this idea of post-secularism right now, and I have some other themed series in the works right now. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in our next exploration.